In the bright first-class cabin of a regular flight, a successful black man, or respected CEO, was quietly pushed down to economy class for a reason that was vague and unreasonable to anyone who heard it. No shouting, no violent reaction, just the look of a man who had gone through too many invisible cuts in his life. But what stopped everyone was not the humiliation, but the choice he was about to make. Stay silent and return to the standard, or stand up for what was right, even though he knew the whole cabin would be watching him, judging him, and the whole world would be watching. If it were you, what would you do? Would you bow your head and let things be? Or would you stand up, even if your hands were shaking, and say, "I deserve respect," a story not just about a denied first-class seat, but about dignity, something we sometimes lose without even realizing it. If you want to know how that choice changed the entire plane, come with me to the story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support us to continue making content that touches your heart. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow as passengers settled into their seats. The engines hummed low, like a beast waiting to be unleashed onto the runway. Flight 782 from Atlanta to Seattle was scheduled for a 7:40 p.m. departure. At 7:28, the aircraft should have been moments from pushing back. Instead, everything was frozen. A tall black man in a charcoal gray business suit stood firmly in the center aisle, less than 10 feet from the first-class curtain. His suit jacket was slightly wrinkled, the left shoulder showing a faint crease, as if someone had grabbed him earlier. His tie hung a little crooked, loosened yet still dignified. His right hand held a boarding pass with the unmistakable gold stripe of a first-class ticket. His left hand rested calmly by his side, steady, unshaking. His name was Dr. Malcolm Reid. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His voice carried the kind of depth that didn't rise in volume, but grew in gravity. "Unless someone explains," he said slowly, clearly, "why my first-class seat was taken from me, this plane will not leave the ground." A wave of uneasy silence swept through the rows. Seatbelts half buckled, heads turned. Even children stopped fidgeting. It was the kind of stillness that happens right before a summer storm breaks open the sky. A woman in row 11 whispered to her husband, "What happened?" A teenager across the aisle raised his phone. "Recording." A businessman in a navy blazer muttered, "This is gonna delay us." But most passengers simply stared at Malcolm, some with confusion, some with discomfort, and some with the quiet recognition of a man pushed past a line he never wanted to cross. Near the front of the cabin, the flight attendant, Lauren Briggs, marched toward him. Her steps were sharp, her expression tight. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a spotless bun. The way she held her chin implied authority, though her eyes flickered with something less steady annoyance and a hint of panic. "Sir," she hissed, "you need to take your seat immediately. You are disrupting flight safety." Malcolm didn't blink. "I'm not disrupting anything," he said. "I'm asking for the truth." Lauren raised her voice, letting the entire cabin hear. "If you refuse to sit, I'll call airport security. You will be removed from this aircraft." A few passengers flinched. A woman near the window whispered, "Oh no." Someone clicked their tongue nervously, but Malcolm remained grounded, like a soldier planted in place. "My first-class seat. Seat 1A was reassigned without explanation," he said calmly. "I was forced into 23B with a fabricated reason. And unless the crew can show me the actual documentation, I'm not moving." His tone wasn't angry. It was measured, controlled. Deep with conviction, the kind forged from years of swallowing smaller injustices, Lauren crossed her arms. "We told you, It was for weight balance." Malcolm lifted the boarding pass, the gold stripe catching the dim cabin light, and I asked for proof of that claim. Because as I walked past first class, seat 1A was still empty. A soft ripple ran through the cabin. Several passengers nodded. They had seen the empty seat too. Lauren's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, a young man 2 rows behind Malcolm sat forward. "I saw it," he said, raising his phone. "I walked past the cabin right before you boarded. No one was sitting there." Lauren shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "Sir, please stay out of this." But it was too late. The air had shifted. The tension was no longer just between Malcolm and Lauren. It stretched across the cabin like an invisible net, pulling everyone into its center. A middle-aged Latino man in aisle seat 17C shook his head. "I've flown this route for 12 years. I've never heard of weight balance right before takeoff." "Never," someone else muttered. "Yeah, doesn't sound right." Lauren swallowed. Her posture stiffened as she tried to regain ground. "We need to depart. We're behind schedule. Please sit down. Doctor—" She glanced down at her tablet, pretending to verify something she had already seen. "Reid." But Malcolm didn't move. He simply breathed in, slow and steady, the way a man breathes when he is done staying silent. "I've spent my entire life being polite," he said softly, looking not at Lauren, but at the passengers each row, each face. "I've spent my entire life giving people the benefit of the doubt. Not today." A soft chill ran through the cabin, because they could hear something in his voice, not anger, but a wound, a deep, old wound. Lauren's expression flickered. For a moment, she looked unsure. Then her professionalism snapped back in place. "Sir, I'm ordering you to sit down." Malcolm turned toward her. "That is not your call to make. I am requesting to speak directly with the captain." A gasp broke out somewhere in the back. Someone whispered, "He's serious." Lauren took a step forward, lowering her voice just enough to keep the confrontation tight. "Captain Miller doesn't need to deal with this. You'll follow crew instructions." Malcolm met her gaze with a calmness that felt almost unbreakable. If the captain is unaware that a first-class passenger was forcibly downgraded without just cause, then yes, he does need to deal with this. Before Lauren could respond, the cockpit door opened with a soft metallic click. Every head turned. The first officer, a woman in her late 30s named Erin Shaw, stepped out. Her voice carried a firm professionalism. "What's going on here? We can't take off with a passenger in the aisle." Lauren rushed toward her like a lifeline. "Erin, this passenger is refusing to sit. He's causing a disturbance." Erin's eyes shifted toward Malcolm. She didn't raise her brow. She didn't frown. She simply observed steady and neutral. "What seems to be the issue?" Sir Malcolm offered her the boarding pass. "My seat was taken. I was pushed to the back. I asked for documentation. No one has provided it. I won't sit until this is addressed." The first officer studied him for a moment. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened just barely. "I'll notify the captain," she said. "Give me 1 minute." She disappeared back into the cockpit. The door closed, and the cabin, once buzzing, now held a different kind of silence, a silence thick with anticipation, a silence that said this is no longer a small incident. This is something much bigger. Malcolm stood there, breathing slow, feeling every pair of eyes on him. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want a scene, but something inside him whispered, "Enough." The cabin of Flight 782 felt like it was holding its breath. Yet Malcolm Reid stood in the aisle with the patience of a man who had learned, through a lifetime of trials, how to remain steady even when everything around him trembled. His pulse beat slow and deliberate. His breathing stayed quiet. His thoughts, however, were anything but silent. They moved beneath the calm surface like deep water carrying stories too long restrained. To the passengers who watched him now, he was a stranger. But in truth, he was a man shaped by storms long before this moment on a plane. Malcolm Reid, age 45, had spent over 2 decades building an empire in the cybersecurity world. He was the founder and CEO of Iron Shield Cyber Defense, a company trusted by hospitals, research facilities, and even parts of the federal health network. The man who stood in the narrow aisle tonight had testified before Congress, briefed military security teams, and spoken on national stages about protecting vulnerable systems in a digital era. Still, no title had ever shielded him from the subtle cuts of judgment that followed him since youth. His presence carried the stillness of someone who chose gentleness even when he had the strength to crush mountains. His voice was the kind that spoke low but landed heavy, not because of volume, but because of conviction. He moved with quiet intention, every gesture respectful but firm, a balance that came naturally to him but was often misunderstood by those who had never needed restraint to survive. He was a father of 2, a mentor to dozens, and a symbol to many young black professionals who looked at him and felt a door open. He did not call himself a role model. He simply believed in doing the right thing even when no one was watching, even when it cost him something, even when it hurt. Yet as he stood in the aisle, he sensed a familiar ache deep inside. The same ache he had carried for years each time someone looked at him and saw everything except who he truly was. It pressed against his ribs like an old bruise refusing to fade. Earlier that day, before the chaos unfolded at 30,000 feet, Malcolm had been in the final stages of preparing for one of the most consequential meetings of his career. Iron Shield was close to securing a contract valued at $450 million to build a national data protection framework for a healthcare system that served millions. It was the kind of contract that didn't just add value to a company, but set the course for a safer digital future. His executive team had been calling nonstop. His calendar was filled with meetings layered with detail. Every department awaited updates on the negotiation. Malcolm, however, remained composed. Pressure had been a constant companion all his life. It no longer frightened him. He remembered how his father once told him, during a quiet talk in their old garage in Detroit, that a man's worth is shown not by how loud he speaks when things go right, but how steady he stands when things go wrong. Malcolm had lived by that principle. It stayed with him through college, through the early startup struggles, and through each boardroom where he had been underestimated for reasons that had nothing to do with talent. Still, underneath that steadiness lived a human heart that felt fatigue, not physical fatigue, the kind that comes from being questioned repeatedly in places where you earned your place, the kind that forms slowly after years of tight smiles and patient explanations, the kind no one sees until a moment like this forces it into the open. Passengers continued to observe him, some with unease, some with curiosity, some with a recognition that came from knowing what it felt like to be singled out for something you never did. A young woman in seat 14A watched Malcolm with her hand pressed lightly to her mouth as if she feared he might break under the weight of the confrontation. She didn't know that Malcolm had endured worse. She didn't know that he carried inside him the resilience of ancestors who survived far more than a reassigned seat. She didn't know that every challenge he faced became a reason to stand taller, not smaller. What she saw now was only the surface of a man who had been forged by experience into a figure of grace and strength. Malcolm's mind drifted to his children. His son was 13 and already asking questions about the world. Questions heavy for a young boy. His daughter was 10 and carried the softness of youth, but also the curiosity of someone watching closely how her father moved through life. Malcolm never wanted them to inherit his burdens. He wanted them to inherit his courage. That thought alone kept him from stepping down or allowing fear to control him. If he backed away from this, what message would that send? That dignity was negotiable, that silence guaranteed peace. He knew both were lies. He kept his eyes calm, his posture measured, but internally, a quiet dialogue unfolded. It moved beneath his ribs like the tide. Should I push further? Should I demand more? Will this escalate beyond my control? Will people misunderstand my intentions? Will my children see this someday and think their father chose conflict? Or will they see a man who refused to shrink? He weighed each question with care. He had always been deliberate. He had always been thoughtful. Even now, standing in the aisle with every stranger watching him, he refused to react out of impulse. He took a slow breath. Air filled his chest. Resolve settled into his bones. He thought of his employees, young analysts trying to make a place for themselves in a world that judged too quickly, engineers who faced challenges no one heard about, interns from underrepresented backgrounds praying for someone stronger to walk ahead and clear the path. His stance tonight was no longer just for himself. It was for them, too. A murmur spread through the rows as the cockpit door clicked open again. This time, the sound was louder, like a signal. Malcolm did not turn his head immediately. He knew who would appear. He prepared himself for what was coming. The passengers who recorded him now held their phones lower, realizing the situation might not be simple annoyance, but something deeply human. Something unfolding in front of them that reflected a truth bigger than a seating mistake. Malcolm stayed still, dignified, grounded. He did not know how the next moments would unfold, but he knew one thing with certainty. He was done shrinking. Whatever happened next, he would face it with the same quiet strength that brought him through every door he had ever entered. The captain needed to hear the truth. The airline needed to answer for its actions. And Malcolm, for once, refused to step aside. He closed his eyes briefly, not from fear, from clarity. Then he lifted his chin. Ready? It was time. The cockpit door opened with a soft click. But before the captain stepped out, Malcolm's mind drifted inward. That small sound stirred something deeper, pulling him back across the years to places he rarely revisited. Moments like this, where he stood tall in the face of quiet disrespect, always reawakened the memories that shaped him long before he became Dr. Malcolm Reid, CEO of Iron Shield Cyber Defense. A voice called his name from the past, his father's voice, firm, warm, heavy with wisdom. Malcolm, life won't always meet you with fairness, but you decide how it shapes you, not the other way around. He had been 12 when his father said those words. They stood outside a small auto repair shop in Detroit. The air smelled of engine oil and metal. His father, Edward Reid, had grease on his hands and tiredness in his eyes. Malcolm remembered how the shop owner had yelled, accusing Edward of scratching a customer's truck. The accusation was false, but the owner had spoken with a confidence that came from knowing his word weighed more in that neighborhood than the word of a black mechanic. Edward didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back in anger. He simply gathered his tools, wiped his hands, and walked out. Malcolm followed him across the cracked pavement, confused. "Why didn't you argue?" he asked. Edward smiled gently, though a sadness hid beneath it. "Because arguing doesn't always reveal the truth. Son, character does." That day imprinted itself into Malcolm like a quiet scar. He learned what dignity looked like in the face of humiliation. He learned that silence was not weakness when chosen with intention. He also learned that dignity alone wasn't always enough to protect someone. Sometimes it needed a voice. Sometimes it needed a stand. Years later, when Malcolm walked into his first corporate internship interview wearing his only suit, he felt the echoes of his childhood return. The receptionist didn't look twice at him before pointing toward the loading dock. "Deliveries are on the side," she said. He had stood there in that lobby for several seconds, unsure whether to laugh or feel the sting that spread across his chest. He had rehearsed his introduction over and over, telling himself he earned his spot at the table. That moment reminded him the world wouldn't always agree. But he introduced himself anyway. He shook hands firmly anyway. He walked into the interview room with his chin held steady. Later that year, he earned the highest performance score in the entire program. He remembered sitting alone in his small apartment near campus that night, eating microwave soup and thinking of his father again. He wished Edward could have seen how far he'd come. His father had passed away 2 summers earlier. Malcolm carried him forward, every day, like a compass that never failed. His mother, Ruth, provided the other half of that compass. She taught math at a public middle school and brought patience into every conversation. When Malcolm felt defeated, she reminded him that identity was not defined by the eyes that misjudged him, but by the choices he made when no one believed in him. She once told him, while folding laundry in their living room with a sitcom playing softly in the background, that the world wasn't fair, but it could be made better piece by piece. "Use your mind," she said. "Use your heart. Use both, and walk in truth." Those words hovered inside him now as he stood in the aisle of Flight 782. Walk in truth, even when the truth made others uncomfortable. He didn't want to create conflict. He didn't want to inconvenience an entire flight. But he recognized the familiar weight pressing against him. He knew what it felt like to be treated as a problem in places where he rightfully belonged. He had lived that truth too many times to count. The memory shifted to his early 30s, when Iron Shield was still a small office above a laundromat. He had gone to a meeting with a potential investor. The man arriving for the meeting saw Malcolm standing near the conference room and handed him a coat. "Be careful with that," the man said. "It's expensive. And bring me coffee before we start." Malcolm had swallowed the sting and gently placed the coat over a chair before sitting across from the man, introducing himself as the founder of the company. The look on the investor's face was unforgettable. A mix of embarrassment, surprise, and disbelief. Iron Shield never took his money. Those memories layered themselves like sediment in Malcolm's heart. Each one shaped his calmness, his patience, his self-control, and also the fire he kept buried under that calm exterior. Back on Flight 782, a woman in row 10 shifted uncomfortably as she watched him stand. She could sense something old, something heavy behind his steady posture. Malcolm wondered briefly if she recognized the expression on his face. It wasn't anger, it was resolve. The kind that grows in people who have been tested too many times but refuse to lose their ground. His breath deepened. The sound of the first officer speaking quietly inside the cockpit filtered faintly into the cabin. Malcolm stayed still, letting the memories settle, letting them anchor him. He hadn't asked to become a symbol tonight. He only wanted to travel in the seat he had rightfully paid for. He only wanted fairness. But life had a way of nudging him back into moments where his choices carried weight. He felt that weight again, not on his shoulders, but in his chest, a familiar heaviness that whispered, "This matters." The door opened fully at last. Captain Miller stepped into view. He had salt and pepper hair and the steady posture of someone who had spent half his life in the cockpit. His eyes scanned the aisle, the passengers, the tension in the air. Then his gaze landed on Malcolm. Malcolm straightened slightly, meeting the captain's eyes without hostility, without fear, only truth. The captain approached, measuring each step as if he felt the gravity of the moment. Malcolm recognized that kind of walk. The walk of a man who understood that leadership sometimes meant stepping directly into discomfort. Passengers leaned forward, waiting, phones lowered, breaths held. Malcolm felt his pulse settle even deeper. He remembered what his mother told him years ago. "Stand tall when the world leans wrong," he whispered inwardly, as if speaking to her. "I'm standing tall. Mom." He didn't know where this confrontation would lead, but he knew something with complete certainty. He would not be dismissed quietly this time. Captain Miller's presence filled the narrow aisle, but Malcolm's thoughts had already begun drifting back to the hours leading to this flight. Moments that seemed small at the time, moments that now felt like puzzle pieces quietly arranging themselves toward the confrontation unfolding around him. In those earlier hours, before the terminal, before the boarding gate, before the sting of having his seat taken without reason. Malcolm had gone through motions that revealed who he was long before anyone judged him on this aircraft. He remembered standing in his apartment, tying the knot of his dark blue tie in front of the mirror. His movements were calm, unrushed, not because he wasn't aware of the weight of the meeting ahead, but because he had learned that rushing never solved anything. It only made the world feel louder than it needed to be. The quiet moments before a demanding journey were precious to him. They held clarity. He adjusted the tie once more, then glanced at the framed photo sitting on his dresser. It showed him with his son Marcus and his daughter Ella at a park, both children holding onto his arms with bright grins. He stared at the picture longer than usual, letting their joy settle into his heart. He wanted them to grow up in a world where dignity wasn't questioned at the gate of an airplane. He wanted them to see that strength didn't require shouting. It required integrity and consistency. A vibration on the nightstand pulled him from the moment. His phone lit up with a call from Iron Shield's COO, David Foster. David's voice came through steady, though layered with the tension of someone managing a huge contract negotiation. "Malcolm, everything's aligned for the meeting in Seattle. The advisory board is on standby. They're expecting your arrival on time." Malcolm smiled softly. I'll be there. Make sure the legal documents stay accessible. We might need to revise one clause in person." David let out a breath that sounded like a nod. "You always look 3 steps ahead. Safe flight. Malcolm." He ended the call and set the phone down gently. The weight of responsibility didn't intimidate him. It grounded him. Iron Shield wasn't just a company. It was the tangible proof of every door he had opened through resilience. It was the place where young engineers felt safe to grow, where innovation met compassion. Malcolm carried that mission with him everywhere he went. He took a light jacket from the closet, smoothing the fabric slowly. The jacket had belonged to his father. It wasn't fashionable, but it held meaning. Wearing it reminded him of Edward Reid's strength. There were days Malcolm wore it just to feel close to him again. Before leaving the apartment, Malcolm paused. He spoke quietly to no one in particular. Let today be steady. It was not a prayer. It was a promise. He locked the door and walked down the hallway of his building. The faint scent of coffee drifted from a neighbor's unit. A small dog barked somewhere in the distance. The elevator ride was slow enough to allow his thoughts to gather in calm waves. When he stepped out into the crisp air outside the building, he felt the familiar blend of anticipation and purpose. The city hummed with its usual rhythm. Cars moved through wet pavement. People walked quickly, some with briefcases, others with gym bags. Everyone carried their own world within them. Malcolm walked through that movement with quiet confidence. A car pulled up to the curb. His driver and longtime friend, Thomas Grant, stepped out. Dr. Reid, ready for Seattle. Malcolm smiled. As ready as I can be. Thomas had driven him to countless meetings. He had witnessed Malcolm's rise from a small startup office to a national cybersecurity leader. He knew better than to speak too much before an important trip. Malcolm appreciated that unspoken understanding between them. Inside the car, the ride was smooth. The city lights slid across the windows, casting reflections on Malcolm's calm expression. He used the drive to review documents on his tablet, though his mind occasionally drifted back to his father's words. Whenever he faced a challenge, they seemed to appear naturally, at a red light. Thomas glanced at him through the mirror. You look focused. Malcolm closed his tablet slowly. Big decisions ahead. They affect more than just me. Thomas nodded. You'll handle it, like always. Those words carried weight. Malcolm didn't respond, but he felt them sink into him in a comforting way. The road leading to the Atlanta airport was familiar. He had traveled this route countless times, yet this trip felt different. Not anxious, but significant. There was a sense of something shifting beneath the surface of his day, though he couldn't name what it was at the time. When the car approached the drop-off lane, Malcolm saw travelers moving with hurried purpose. Luggage wheels clattered, digital screens flickered with departure times, and overhead speakers carried announcements in a steady cadence. He stepped out of the car, inhaling the scent of travel coffee from nearby kiosks, the faint cologne of passing businessmen, the sterile cool of the terminal doors. Thomas grabbed Malcolm's suitcase and handed it to him. Go get that contract. And remember, stay steady. Malcolm gave a thoughtful nod. I'll let you know when I land. He watched Thomas drive away before turning toward the automatic doors. They opened with a soft whoosh, and the airport swallowed him into its controlled chaos. He moved through the terminal with his boarding pass in his hand, his steps unhurried but purposeful. Every decision he had made since childhood had led him to this moment. Every hardship, every victory, every small act of choosing grace over anger. He believed he was simply walking toward a meeting that would shape his company's future. He had no idea he was walking into a confrontation that would force him to confront the very core of who he was. The announcement for the Seattle flight echoed through the terminal. Passengers shifted, screens updated, voices blended into one continuous hum. Malcolm checked the time. He was perfectly early, exactly as planned. He adjusted the strap of his bag and continued toward the security checkpoint, unaware that in a few hours the entire nation would know his name, not for a contract, but for an act of dignity that would leave an imprint far beyond his career. He walked with calm confidence, believing the day ahead belonged to business and strategy. He couldn't know that a single seat on a plane would ask him to rise in a way he hadn't expected. The flow of travelers moved around Malcolm in gentle waves as he stepped deeper into the Atlanta terminal. Overhead lights reflected off polished floors. Voices blended into a steady murmur. Rolling luggage wheels created a soft percussion that followed him through the concourse. He walked with natural ease, his posture straight, his steps steady. His mind remained sharp, focused on the upcoming contract meeting, though a faint undercurrent of unease tugged at him. It wasn't anything he could name, just a quiet shift in the air, the kind a person senses before a storm they can't see yet. He reached the dedicated lane for first-class check-in. The sign glowed in a soft blue, a simple reminder that the seat he paid for was supposed to guarantee comfort and respect. Malcolm waited briefly as a man in a tailored gray suit stepped up to the counter. The agent greeted the man with a warm smile and easy familiarity. Their exchange lasted less than a minute. When Malcolm stepped forward next, the agent's smile faded almost instantly. The man behind the counter was young, his hair neatly combed, his uniform crisp. He glanced at Malcolm's ticket, then looked at Malcolm. His eyes shifted between the two, as if unable to reconcile them. Malcolm offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon." The agent didn't respond right away. He swallowed, then forced a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, can I see your ID again?" Malcolm handed it to him calmly. "You saw it when I walked up?" "Yes." "Well, just verifying." The agent typed something slowly into his system. His movements were hesitant, almost cautious. Malcolm recognized the expression. He had seen it in boardrooms, hotel lobbies, and conference entrances across his career. It was the look that asked a silent question. "Do you belong here?" "Everything okay?" Malcolm asked. The agent's fingers paused for a moment before he nodded. "Just checking something." Another customer stepped into the lane behind Malcolm. She shifted impatiently, sighing under her breath. The agent glanced at her quickly, then back at Malcolm, as if afraid she might overhear the hesitation in his tone. At last, the printer spat out the boarding documents. The agent handed them to Malcolm, but not with the smooth confidence he displayed with the previous passenger. "There you go, sir. First-class seat, 1A. Boarding at gate C-17. Enjoy your flight." Malcolm accepted the pass with a polite thank you, but he could feel the weight of the moment lingering in his chest, the way a single off note lingers after the rest of the chord has faded. He stepped aside to adjust the strap on his carry-on. As he did, he overheard a quiet whisper from one of the employees at the counter. "Why'd you double-check him?" the young agent replied under his breath. "I just wasn't sure. Didn't look like the usual." His words drifted off, but Malcolm didn't need the rest. The unfinished sentence was loud enough. He straightened, inhaling a slow breath. Every nerve inside him urged him to keep moving, not to let a small sting derail his composure. He walked towards security with measured steps. At the TSA checkpoint, the priority line was short. A middle-aged officer with a trimmed beard scanned Malcolm's boarding pass. His expression remained neutral until his eyes reached the first-class label. Something flickered across his face, something Malcolm couldn't quite define. "Step aside for additional screening," the officer said. Malcolm lifted his gaze to meet his. "Is there an issue?" "Just routine." Behind Malcolm, a white couple passed through the same checkpoint without a single question. The man wore gym shorts. The woman wore flip-flops. Both breezed through effortlessly. Routine. Malcolm felt the word echo like a familiar refrain. He removed his shoes, belt, and jacket. He emptied his pockets with the quiet patience of a man who had done this 1,000 times. The officer patted him down with a scrutiny that bordered on suspicion. Another agent rummaged through his neatly packed bag, opening folders, flipping through papers carelessly. Some passengers slowed as they passed, pretending not to stare, but unable to hide it entirely. Malcolm kept his expression still, steady. A younger black officer near the far scanner caught his eye. Their gazes met for a brief moment. The officer gave a small, understanding nod, not sympathy, recognition. A shared history neither of them spoke aloud. After the search stretched longer than necessary, the lead agent waved him through. "You're good to go." Malcolm nodded, gathered his belongings, and moved away with measured calm. He told himself not to let annoyance grow roots. He had work to do. Lives, systems, and national infrastructure depended on his clarity. He walked toward his gate. Screens flickered with destinations. People hurried around him, some dragging suitcases while trying to sip from plastic cups, others scrolling on their phones, absorbed in their own worlds. Malcolm passed by a small coffee stand. The aroma reminded him of mornings with his mother, when she would brew a strong pot before heading to teach algebra to 7th graders. For a moment, the memory softened something inside him. He ordered a black coffee and stood near the window with it, watching the planes move across the tarmac. A voice interrupted him. "Excuse me." Sir A flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Hannah Lee. She wore the uniform of a different airline and appeared to be off duty, carrying a small tote bag with a stack of notebooks inside. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but are you Dr. Malcolm Reid?" He blinked, surprised not by recognition, but by the warmth in her eyes. "Yes, I am. I watched your talk at the National Cyber Forum last month." She smiled shyly. "Your words about protecting patient data gave so many people hope. My sister is a nurse. She talked about it for weeks." He softened. "Thank you. Tell her she's the one doing the hard work." The small exchange grounded him. It reminded him that despite the uncomfortable moments at the counters and checkpoints, the world also held people who saw him clearly. When he reached gate C-17, boarding had not yet begun. A few passengers sat in cushioned seats, scrolling their screens. The gate agent, a man in his 30s with sandy hair, was typing rapidly at his computer. Malcolm approached the counter to confirm the boarding process. Before speaking, he noticed the agent's eyes sweep over him from head to toe. Not curious, evaluating. "Can I help you?" the agent asked. "I'm here for Flight 782, Malcolm said, offering a polite smile. "Just checking on boarding time." The agent's eyes lingered on the first-class label. He hesitated. "A beat too long." "That's fine," Malcolm said, withdrawing slightly. "Thank you." As he walked toward an empty chair, something cold flickered in the agent's gaze, something Malcolm couldn't yet name. But he felt it. He felt it settle like a distant rumble of thunder. He sat, placed his coffee beside him, and clasped his hands gently. He breathed, steady and intentional. A simple trip, a familiar gait, a standard flight. Yet the signs were shifting. And Malcolm sensed that the journey ahead would demand more from him than any business meeting ever could. The announcement for pre-boarding echoed through the waiting area, rolling across the seats in a calm, practiced tone. Malcolm lifted his gaze from the document he'd been reviewing and watched the first small group approach the gate. Passengers rose from their spots with the familiar shuffle of anticipation, adjusting straps and grabbing jackets. Malcolm remained seated for a moment, allowing the crowd ahead of him to thin. His boarding group, first class, and elite status would be called next. He took a slow sip of his coffee, The warmth traveled through him in a comforting line, steadying his thoughts. He folded the document and slipped it into his bag, then stood with quiet intention. He walked toward the queue, blending naturally into the small cluster of first-class passengers gathering near the gate. The gate agent, the same man whose earlier expression had carried an uncertain hesitation, shifted his weight as Malcolm approached. His eyes lingered on Malcolm's ticket longer than necessary, as if searching for something out of place. A woman in front of Malcolm offered a polite smile. She wore a tailored navy coat and carried a leather briefcase. "You heading to Seattle for business?" she asked. "Yes," Malcolm replied warmly. "Important meeting tomorrow." "Well, first-class seats will make it easier." She chuckled lightly. "At least we get a bit of room." Malcolm nodded. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. Her smile softened. She seemed like someone used to travel, someone who understood the subtle weary edges that came with long flights. He appreciated the small conversation. It helped ground him after the uneasy encounters throughout the airport. The intercom chimed again. "First-class passengers and elite members, you may now board." The woman stepped forward. Malcolm followed a few paces behind her. The gate agent scanned her pass and gave her a bright smile. "Enjoy your flight." When Malcolm extended his own boarding pass, the agent's reaction shifted. His smile faded, his shoulders tensed. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. A soft discomfort fluttered across Malcolm's chest. "Is there an issue?" he asked gently. The agent cleared his throat. "No, just checking something." The pause stretched. Passengers behind Malcolm shuffled impatiently. The agent finally nodded and handed the boarding pass back with a terse expression. "You can board." Malcolm accepted it without letting frustration show. His expression stayed calm, composed. He walked down the jet bridge. The cool air met him with a faint metallic scent. The slight hum of ventilation created a distant whisper around him. A few passengers ahead stepped confidently toward the aircraft door. When Malcolm reached the entrance, a flight attendant stood ready to greet passengers. Her name tag read, "Lauren Briggs." Her smile was practiced, though it tightened slightly the moment her eyes landed on him. "Welcome aboard." There was no warmth behind her voice, only a rigid politeness that felt colder than silence. Malcolm offered a respectful nod. "Thank you." As he walked into first class, the wide leather seats greeted him with their promise of comfort. He glanced toward seat 1A, his seat. It was still empty. A neatly folded blanket and pillow rested atop the cushion. He felt a brief relief wash through him. He moved forward to place his bag in the overhead compartment, but before he touched it, he heard Lauren's voice behind him. "Sir, I need to verify your seat assignment." He turned slowly. What seems to be the concern, Lauren held a small tablet in her hands, her thumb tapping rapidly across the screen. "Your information isn't loading correctly on our end. I have my boarding pass right here," Malcolm replied calmly. "Seat 1A. Lauren forced a quick smile. "Yes. Well, just give me a moment." Her tone was clipped, as if she were holding back irritation that had nothing to do with technology. Malcolm waited patiently. He knew microaggressions were often wrapped in bureaucratic language. Phrases like system checks and verification issues had followed him through hotel lobbies, conference registration desks, and rental car counters. They were familiar, unwelcome companions. A young attendant named Mia, working farther down the aisle, glanced up. She noticed the interaction and paused. Malcolm saw concern flicker in her eyes. She said nothing but continued preparing her station. Lauren stepped closer to him. I'm going to ask you to wait here while we confirm your seat. Please step out of the aisle so other passengers can board. Her tone held a firmness that suggested accusation rather than procedure. Malcolm did as she asked. He didn't want to block the flow of boarding passengers. He moved to the side, holding his bag near his feet. People walked past him with curious glances, some trying to hide their confusion, others unable to disguise it. A man in a business suit frowned as he passed. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. Malcolm gave him a reassuring nod, just waiting for them to sort something. The man nodded sympathetically before taking his seat. Mia approached quietly. "Can I help with anything, sir?" she asked with a soft voice. Before Malcolm could respond, Lauren interjected sharply. "Mia, I've got this." Mia's eyes lowered. "Yes, Lauren." The tone stung Malcolm more than the words, not for himself, but because he recognized the pattern. Someone trying to help was dismissed to maintain control of a situation that didn't need policing. Passengers continued to board. A young couple entered first class. The woman tapped Malcolm's arm gently. "Are you waiting for something, seat verification?" Malcolm said calmly. "They're checking it." She frowned. "You're in first class." "Right. Why would they need to verify?" Her boyfriend nudged her lightly, whispering for her to let it go. She gave Malcolm a sympathetic look and continued to her seat. The cabin grew fuller. The overhead bins filled quickly. The sound of luggage latches clicking shut added a steady beat to the rising tension. At last. Lauren looked up from her tablet. "Sir, your seat assignment is being reviewed by the gate. Please step back out to the jet bridge while we sort this out." A quiet stillness settled inside Malcolm. He felt something inside him shift. Not anger, not surprise. A familiar realization. Here it was again. The moment where he was asked to step aside without explanation. He spoke with a voice that remained gentle but unwavering. "Can you tell me why my seat is under review?" Lauren's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "It's a procedural matter." Then what procedure triggered it? Her jaw tightened. "I need you to move to the jet bridge." Passengers nearby paused their conversations. A few looked up from their screens. Tension spread through the space like slow ripples on water. Mia stepped closer again, hesitant but brave. "Lauren, maybe we should just check with the gate supervisor. It could be a simple error." Lauren glared. "I said I have it handled." Malcolm felt the line being drawn in front of him. He had walked this line too many times. He knew exactly how it felt beneath his feet. He held his boarding pass in one hand, his bag in the other. His dignity balanced quietly between them. The storm he sensed earlier had begun to gather. Malcolm stood just inside the entrance of first class, his bag resting gently against his leg. Around him, passengers continued to settle into their seats, unaware of how quickly the balance inside the cabin was shifting. The energy felt taut, like a quiet thread pulled too tightly across the room. Lauren Briggs held her tablet close, tapping with hurried motions. Her face reflected a strange mix of irritation and something sharper, something Malcolm had seen before in many places, where he was not expected to stand at the front. Every instinct inside him urged calm. Every memory reminded him that composure did not mean surrender. The aisle grew narrow as more passengers boarded. Malcolm stepped slightly aside to keep the way clear. A tall man in a blazer paused, confusion rolling gently across his face. "Sir, everything all right?" the man asked softly. Malcolm offered a short nod. "Just a seating clarification. I hope they sort it quickly." The man gave a kind smile before taking his seat. Lauren glanced up. Her tone clipped. Sir, I asked you to step out to the jet bridge so we can resolve this. Malcolm met her gaze steadily. And I asked for an explanation. If there is a specific reason, I'm open to hearing it. Her jaw tightened. Her voice lowered into something firm, nearly sharp. You're delaying boarding. Malcolm breathed slowly, shoulders relaxed. I'm standing exactly where you instructed me to stand. Off to the side, not blocking anyone. Passengers watched quietly, their glances cautious, curious, uncertain. The atmosphere thickened. From farther down the cabin, Mia hesitated again before stepping closer. Her voice held gentleness and sensible caution. Lauren, maybe check with the gate one more time. It really might just be a glitch. Lauren shot her a cold stare that froze her mid-step. Mia. Enough. Mia lowered her eyes and stepped backward. The worry lingered in her expression. Malcolm could feel the subtle shift in the room. People were paying attention. He didn't want a scene. He wanted fairness. But the more he tried to stay patient, the more resistance he encountered. Lauren tapped at her tablet again, then sighed loudly as if placing blame on him for the delay. The issue came from the system. Your seat may need to be changed. Malcolm felt a quiet heaviness in his chest. Changed? For what reason? Operational needs. What operational needs? She raised her chin. I'm not required to explain that. Please step outside. Malcolm looked at the empty seat 1A, waiting in the corner of his vision. Untouched. Prepared for him. Still vacant. He turned back to Lauren with controlled warmth in his voice. If the seat is available, and I purchased it, and there is no safety or operational documentation to justify a reassignment, then I expect to sit where I'm assigned. Lauren's face hardened. I'm calling the gate agent. She stepped away briskly, disappearing down the jet bridge. The noise around Malcolm softened into a hush. Conversations dimmed. Eyes followed him. A woman in the second row leaned slightly into the aisle. That's your seat, isn't it? Yes. It shouldn't be complicated. Her tone held quiet frustration. This doesn't seem right. Malcolm gave a gentle nod of appreciation. I'm hoping it's just a misunderstanding. His voice remained steady, but inside, a quiet struggle formed. He had lived enough years to recognize when a misunderstanding began to disguise something else. A part of him wondered if he should simply accept whatever seat they offered just to avoid escalation. He had done that many times in his life, choosing peace over discomfort. Another part of him, the part shaped by his father's lessons and his mother's resilience, whispered something different. How many times would he be expected to yield? How many times would silence be mistaken for acceptance? What lesson would he unknowingly teach his children if he stayed quiet now? He inhaled deeply, letting the air anchor his thoughts. Footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. The gate agent appeared, his expression clouded with discomfort. He held a handheld device, tapping nervously at the screen. He avoided direct eye contact with Malcolm. Sir, the agent said, voice uneven. We're going to need to relocate you to a different seat. Malcolm's tone stayed calm. What is the reason for relocation? The agent swallowed. There's a weight distribution adjustment. A few passengers exchanged glances. Someone scoffed softly. Malcolm lifted the boarding pass. This seat is empty. I boarded early. There is no distribution conflict. It's the instruction we received, the agent said. Shrinking? From whom Malcolm asked gently. The agent hesitated. Operations. Malcolm felt something settle inside him, like a quiet click of understanding. The same pattern, the same coded language, The same refusal to explain. "I would like to see the documentation," Malcolm said. "It's not available at the moment." Then the reasoning isn't valid. Passengers around them grew still. Phones shifted in hands. Eyes watched without blinking. Lauren returned, her tone thinly veiled with impatience. "Sir, you must take the reassigned seat, or we will escalate this." Malcolm slowly placed his bag on the ground and straightened. "I don't wish to cause trouble, but I won't accept a downgrade without a legitimate explanation." The young woman in row 2 spoke again, louder this time. "He's right. I flew this airline for years. They never move a first-class passenger like this." Her voice sparked others. A man in row 3 added, "We all saw the seat open." An older passenger nodded. "This doesn't feel like a weight issue." Lauren's face reddened. "Please stop interfering." The surrounding passengers didn't move. They simply waited. Malcolm exhaled quietly. He wished he didn't have to stand this ground. He wished it were simple, clean, transparent. But life had taught him that fairness rarely arrived without resistance. He looked at the gate agent again. "You're asking me to surrender a seat I paid for without a reason. I'm not refusing instruction. I'm requesting clarity." Lauren pulled herself to full height. "Sir, this flight cannot continue until you comply." Malcolm held her gaze. "I understand." His voice stayed soft, but his posture stayed firm. The tension inside the cabin was no longer subtle. It was a living thing, growing, pulsing, filling every inch of space. Malcolm felt the line he had walked for years rise again beneath his feet. This time, he chose to stop moving backward. The moment stood suspended, waiting for what would come next. A soft hush settled over first class, the kind that signals something deeper stirring beneath the surface. Malcolm remained standing near the entrance, the boarding pass still in his hand. His presence was calm, but the tension surrounding him thickened with each passing second. He could feel the shift inside the cabin, the way curiosity gave way to concern. Passengers continued watching, some subtly, others openly, unable to look away. Lauren stood a few feet from him, tablet pressed against her chest, her patience thinning. "Sir, the crew has given instructions. Please follow them." Her words carried the sharpness of someone expecting obedience without question. Malcolm kept his tone steady. "I'm asking for one thing, a clear explanation." Before she could respond, a man stepped through the first-class curtain. He wore a tan jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, his camera already rolling in his hand. His voice carried the measured neutrality of someone used to asking questions for a living. "Excuse me," he said quietly to Malcolm. "Are you Dr. Malcolm Reid?" Malcolm turned his head slightly. "Yes." The man offered a respectful nod. "My name's Aaron Clark, tech reporter. I spoke with your chief security engineer last year. Your team's work on encrypted patient data made national news." Malcolm recognized the name. Clark's pieces were widely read. "I appreciate your support," Malcolm said. Aaron glanced at the empty first-class seat behind Malcolm, then looked toward Lauren. "That seat is still open." Lauren stiffened. "Sir, please refrain from recording." Aaron lowered his voice. "I'm documenting an inconsistency. A paid first-class seat is unoccupied, and the passenger assigned to it is being told to move to coach." The word coach rippled through the nearby seats. Several heads lifted. Lauren stepped closer, her tone brisk. "This is a private airline procedure. You cannot interfere." Aaron didn't argue. He simply angled his camera toward seat 1A again, then toward Malcolm's boarding pass. The gold stripe glowed faintly under the overhead light. A woman across the aisle leaned forward. "Is this really happening?" Her voice held disbelief mixed with sympathy. Malcolm offered a small, reassuring smile to calm the passengers. "I'm hoping it's a misunderstanding." For a moment, silence returned. Only the soft rustle of settling passengers filled the air. Then, unexpectedly, Mia approached again. The young flight attendant looked uneasy, as if torn between protocol and conscience. She kept her voice low, but not hidden. "Sir," she said gently to Malcolm, "your name appears correctly on the first-class manifest. There shouldn't be an issue." Lauren turned sharply. "Mia, step back." Mia didn't move right away. She glanced at Malcolm with a quiet apology in her eyes before retreating. The brief act of courage tightened something in Malcolm's chest. It reminded him that dignity rarely traveled alone. Somewhere, someone always saw the truth. A whisper rose from row 2. "Unbelievable." Another passenger shook his head. "Weight distribution." That's the excuse. Malcolm didn't look toward them. He focused on Lauren instead. "I'm willing to cooperate fully, but I won't be dismissed without reason." Lauren pressed her lips together, her patience fraying. "I have instructed you to exit the cabin. Refusal to do so will be considered failure to comply." Malcolm breathed in slowly. "I'm not refusing. I'm asking." Her cheeks reddened, and she stepped back toward the galley as if needing distance. Passengers sensed the unfolding conflict and leaned into the moment with stillness. They weren't staring out of curiosity anymore. They were witnessing something they recognized as wrong. Aaron continued recording, though his expression held more concern than excitement. "I've documented similar incidents," he said quietly to Malcolm. "This one is particularly clear." Malcolm felt the truth of that statement. Seat 1A remained empty. His name was on the manifest. No documentation had been provided. Every excuse evaporated beneath simple facts. A man from the middle section of first-class rose, stepping near the aisle. His voice carried a calm firmness. "Sir," he said to Malcolm, "if you need a witness, I saw the agent scan your pass. Everything looked normal." Malcolm nodded respectfully. "Thank you." Lauren reappeared from the galley. Frustration etched across her face. "Sir, step onto the jet bridge now, or this escalates to the captain." It was meant as a warning, but her tone betrayed irritation. Not protocol. Malcolm kept his posture steady. "Good. Let's involve the captain. That's what I've been requesting." A faint murmur of approval rose from passengers. "Finally," someone whispered. "He deserves that," another added. Lauren blinked, momentarily thrown off by the shift in the cabin. Before she could respond, the first officer, Aaron Shaw, stepped through the curtain. Her presence brought an immediate hush. She looked calm, but carried the firmness of someone who knew their authority and intended to use it wisely. "What seems to be the issue here?" Aaron asked. Lauren began speaking quickly. "This passenger is refusing to follow instructions. He needs to move seats, and he's causing a disruption." Aaron turned to Malcolm. Sir Malcolm met her gaze with composed clarity. "I purchased seat 1A. It remains empty. I have not been provided any legitimate reason for reassignment. I have asked for documentation. None was given." Aaron's eyes flicked toward the empty seat, then toward the boarding pass in Malcolm's hand. "What reason were you given?" she asked. "Weight distribution?" Aaron blinked. That is not a standard protocol for first-class reassignment, especially not minutes before departure. Lauren stiffened. "I was following instructions." "What instructions?" Aaron asked. Lauren hesitated. From operations. Aaron's brow tightened. Operations doesn't issue seat changes directly to attendants. They communicate through dispatch or gate management. Silence dropped again. Malcolm watched Lauren's face shift. Her jaw tightened, her breath shallow. Her certainty was cracking. Passengers followed every second like a heartbeat. Aaron looked at the gate agent, who had quietly re-entered the cabin. "Did operations contact you?" He swallowed. "We received a suggestion, not a directive." From whom, Aaron asked. He looked down. From internal staff. A soft gasp came from someone near the window. Aaron stood straighter. "Show me the manifest." Mia stepped forward quickly, handing over her device. Aaron scrolled through, verifying names and assignments. "She's right," Aaron said. "Doctor, Reid is listed in seat 1A. No changes." Lauren's face turned pale. Aaron's next words carried the weight of authority. "There is no operational cause for reassignment. Sir, thank you for your patience. You may take your seat." A wave of relief and vindication moved through the cabin. Soft applause broke out from the second row, spreading gently, respectfully. Malcolm nodded at Aaron. "Thank you for checking." Just as he reached for his bag, a sound cut through the air. A chime from the overhead system. The cockpit door unlocked. Passengers turned in unison. Captain Miller stepped out. The energy shifted again. Deeper, heavier, like the calm before a verdict. Malcolm felt every heartbeat inside the room synchronize with the next moment. The confrontation wasn't over. It had just reached the person who held the highest authority on the plane. Captain Miller stepped into the first-class cabin with a presence that immediately stilled the space. His posture was firm, shoulders squared, eyes alert. He scanned the aisle with the practiced awareness of a man who had resolved dozens of onboard conflicts. Yet something in his expression signaled he understood this situation needed more than procedure. It needed discernment. Passengers quieted, leaning subtly toward the aisle. Even the hum of the ventilation seemed to soften. Aaron Shaw stood near Malcolm, holding the manifest. She offered the captain a respectful nod. "Captain, we have a seating dispute that requires your attention." Lauren stiffened. The tension in her face grew more pronounced as the captain approached. Captain Miller looked at Malcolm first. Not with suspicion, not with impatience, with curiosity, with the awareness that a story existed here, and he needed to understand it fully. "Sir," he said calmly, "could you tell me what's happening from your perspective?" Malcolm appreciated the straightforwardness. "I purchased seat 1A, he said, handing the captain his boarding pass. "The seat remains empty. I was reassigned without any legitimate explanation. I requested documentation. None was provided." The captain nodded slowly, as if replaying the information in his mind. He then turned to Aaron. "First officer, have you verified the manifest?" "Yes," she said. "Dr. Reid is listed in 1A. No updated entries. No operational note justifying a change." Captain Miller shifted his attention to the gate agent, who instructed the reassignment. The agent's throat bobbed, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't an instruction, more of a suggestion. From whom he hesitated. "I'm not sure if I should say." Passengers leaned in further. Someone whispered, "This is unbelievable." Malcolm remained still, his breathing calm, though his heart carried the weight of the moment. He kept his composure, but the quiet ache beneath his ribs lingered. He knew too well how easily dignity could be dismissed behind procedural language. Captain Miller's voice remained steady. "Speak clearly, please. We need full transparency." The gate agent exhaled shakily. It came from someone in the cabin crew before boarding. All eyes shifted to Lauren. Her chin lifted slightly as if bracing for impact. She spoke quickly, her tone defensive. "I only asked for verification. That is within my job responsibilities." The captain studied her for a long moment. Verification is one thing. Attempting to reassign a paid first-class seat without protocol is another. Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line. "I believed there was an issue." "That issue was not based on system data," Aaron interjected gently but firmly. "Passengers exchanged looks." A soft murmur rippled across the rows. In row 2, the same woman who had defended Malcolm earlier raised her hand slightly. "Captain, may I say something?" He nodded. "Go ahead." "I watched Dr. Reid board," she said. "Nothing unusual happened. He wasn't holding up the line. He didn't cause any trouble. There was no reason to question him." A man beside her chimed in. "And the seat has been empty the whole time. No other passenger tried to claim it." Another voice added, "This feels wrong. All of it." Phones subtly rose. Screens glowed. The moment was becoming larger than the cabin. Lauren's voice rose sharply. "These passengers do not understand airline operations." A man in business attire responded from behind her. "I fly this airline every week. I know enough to say this doesn't follow procedure." The atmosphere thickened. Tension layered the air like mist rolling across a quiet field. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly. Centering himself, he could feel the weight of the cabin's attention. The small tremor of injustice that had sparked earlier was now a flame spreading through the rows. He opened his eyes again. Steady. "Captain," he said softly, "I want nothing more than to sit in the seat I rightfully purchased. I don't want conflict, but dignity matters." The captain studied him with an expression Malcolm had seen in leaders who understood responsibility beyond their titles. He turned back to Lauren. "Did you feel this passenger didn't belong in first class?" he asked gently. Lauren's eyes widened. "That's not what It's a simple question," the captain said, voice calm but unyielding. She faltered. "I wasn't certain. His boarding details looked unusual." "That is not a justification," Aaron said quietly beside her. Aaron Clark began recording again. The camera's soft click felt huge in the silence. Lauren's breath quickened. She glanced around, seeing judgment in faces that had once been indifferent. The captain let a gentle pause linger, then addressed the cabin. "We will resolve this peacefully, but I care about honesty, safety, and respect. For every passenger." Soft nods spread. He returned the boarding pass to Malcolm. "Sir, you may take seat 1A." Before Malcolm moved, a voice cut through the quiet. A young man from economy who had walked up from the back section spoke hesitantly. "Captain, I saw something earlier." Everyone turned. The young man swallowed. "When I boarded, I overheard her say something to the gate agent." He nodded toward Lauren. She said, "Double-check that one in first class." Her tone didn't sound like concern. It sounded different. Gas rose. Lauren's face flushed deeply. "That is not accurate," she snapped. The young man shook his head firmly. "It is." Passengers shifted, energy intensifying. Malcolm felt the air change in a deeper way, not in hostility, but in awakening. Captain Miller raised a hand to quiet the growing rumble. "This conversation needs privacy," he said, his voice gentle but resolute. "But before we move forward, I need to acknowledge something." He turned to face the passengers fully. "All of you observed something that didn't feel right. I appreciate your honesty, but we need to proceed without hostility or assumption." The cabin calmed slightly. He then faced Malcolm. "You've shown patience, more than most would in your position. I want you seated comfortably before we continue any internal review." A soft wave of relief moved through Malcolm, though a complicated ache still lingered inside. The moment wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about something larger, deeper, painfully familiar. He picked up his bag. As he stepped toward his seat, an older gentleman in row 3 whispered, just loud enough, "We're with you, sir." Another voice added, "This needed to happen." Phones recorded quietly, capturing a moment none of them would forget. Malcolm reached seat 1A. He placed his bag overhead. He settled into the seat with a steady exhale. The leather felt cool beneath him, but it wasn't comfort he felt. It was the heavy understanding that this moment would not end with silence. The captain looked at him one last time. "We're not done yet. But sit, rest. We will handle the rest." Malcolm nodded, though his heart stayed alert. He could sense the story shifting again, like a tide pulling back before a powerful wave. The next moment would change everything. For a moment, first class held its breath. Malcolm sat in seat 1A, the leather cool beneath his hands, yet nothing about the moment felt settled. His body rested, but his mind did not. Quiet truth pulsed in his chest, steady and deep, reminding him that injustice rarely ended simply because someone finally did the right thing. Often, the real test began after the truth was exposed. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, not with judgment, but with concern and solidarity. The passengers sensed the tension that still clung to the air like static. Nothing about the situation had truly resolved. Something lingered, something unfinished. Captain Miller stood only a few feet away from him, still in the aisle, his expression troubled. Erin Shaw remained close, her posture calm but watchful. Lauren stood farther back, stiff and visibly shaken, gripping her tablet as if it could shield her from the weight of the moment. The captain exhaled deeply. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the cabin with a steady voice, "I need a few minutes to sort out internal matters with my crew. Please remain seated." He didn't raise his voice, yet the cabin immediately obeyed. There was a natural authority about him, the quiet kind formed by years of responsibility thousands of feet above the ground. He turned toward Malcolm. "Sir, thank you for your patience throughout this." Malcolm nodded, though his heart remained unsettled. "I appreciate your willingness to listen." "We're not finished," the captain said quietly. "I intend to understand exactly what happened." He stepped out of first class, motioning for Lauren and the gate agent to follow him. The curtain closed behind them, though faint voices drifted through the thin fabric. The tones were sharp, muffled, tense. Erin remained near the galley, watching the curtain with the expression of someone who had seen internal conflicts before, but knew this one carried more weight than usual. Malcolm leaned back slightly, letting his breath settle. He wasn't angry. What he felt was something deeper, something layered, a mix of hurt, resolve, and exhaustion from moments like these repeating across his life in different forms. Passengers began whispering softly. A woman behind him murmured, "I can't believe what just happened." The man beside her added, "Good thing he stood up for himself." Another voice farther back, a little louder, said, "It could have been any of us." Malcolm listened without reacting. Their words were not for him. They were reflections of something bigger. Something in the cabin had shifted. He could feel its awareness waking up in real time. Aaron Clark approached quietly from the aisle. He lowered his phone out of respect. "Dr. Reid," he said softly. "Is it okay if I sit for a moment?" Malcolm nodded. Aaron took the empty seat across the aisle and leaned in. "You handled everything with such composure. Most people would have raised their voice." Malcolm gave a faint, tired smile. "I don't believe in shouting, but I also don't believe in shrinking." Aaron studied him for a moment. "Do you have any idea how many people online would resonate with that line alone?" Malcolm shook his head. "This isn't about going viral. It's about clarity and dignity." Aaron nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "Do you intend to take this further?" Malcolm looked toward the closed curtain. "I'm not sure yet. I didn't come here to fight. But if a system needs correcting, I've never been the kind to turn away." Aaron opened his mouth, perhaps to ask more, but the curtain rustled suddenly. The captain re-entered first class. His expression was stern, more serious than before. Behind him came the gate agent, trembling slightly, and Lauren, who looked like she had lost all the color in her face. The entire cabin shifted into silence. The captain stopped in front of Malcolm's seat. He took a breath, then spoke clearly enough for everyone in first class to hear. "Sir, I've spoken with the crew. I've reviewed the manifest myself. You were reassigned without justification." A murmur rose. Someone whispered, "Finally." The captain continued, "I want to apologize. You deserve transparency and respect. You did not receive either." Malcolm nodded once, acknowledging the sincerity. The captain wasn't finished. He stepped slightly aside so the cabin could see Lauren clearly. "What occurred was not a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "It was a lapse in judgment that should not have happened." Lauren's eyes lowered. She didn't look at Malcolm. She didn't look at anyone. Aaron stepped forward quietly. "Captain, what's next?" The captain folded his arms thoughtfully. "The flight cannot continue until we ensure safety, clarity, and fairness." His next words felt heavy enough to shift the entire mood of the cabin. "At this time, we must determine whether this flight can proceed with the current crew configuration." Passengers exchanged looks. Some gasped softly. Phones lifted unconsciously. Lauren finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Captain, please." He lifted a hand gently, stopping her. "We will discuss this privately. But for now, I need to prioritize the integrity of this flight." He turned back to Malcolm. "Sir, I'm giving you the choice. If you feel uncomfortable continuing this flight under the circumstances, we will delay departure until the situation is addressed to your satisfaction." Gasps spread again. Malcolm's eyes widened slightly. He had not expected this level of recognition. He felt the weight of the moment settle on him. He looked at the passengers. He looked at Aaron, whose steady gaze offered quiet assurance. He looked at the captain, who stood with both firmness and humility. He looked at Lauren, whose expression now trembled with something between fear and regret. Malcolm inhaled slowly. Dignity filled his chest like steady breath. Then he spoke with a calm that carried both strength and sorrow. "I don't want anyone humiliated," he said gently, "even those who misjudged me. I'm not here to punish. I only wanted fairness." The cabin grew even quieter. "But I also won't pretend this didn't happen," he continued. "It needs to be addressed clearly. If not, it will happen again. To someone quieter, someone younger, someone without the strength to speak up." Aaron's breath caught softly. Several passengers nodded. A woman near the window whispered, "Exactly." The captain listened with deep respect. "So," Malcolm finished softly, I ask only that the airline address this transparently, not just for me, for everyone watching." The captain nodded slowly. "You have my word." Malcolm finally leaned back. His jaw softened. His hands relaxed. He had spoken his truth. The plane was no longer simply preparing for a journey. It had become an arena of accountability, a place where silence broke, a place where dignity stood upright. Passengers watched him with admiration, some with tears in their eyes, all with the sense that they had witnessed something significant. The curtain stirred once more. This time, it wasn't fear behind it. It was the shift of a story rising toward its next turning point. The curtain closed again as Captain Miller stepped back into the crew area. His voice faded behind the fabric, low and firm, though none of the passengers could make out his exact words. They only sensed its weight. A hush settled over first class, the kind that comes when people know they are part of something larger than themselves. Malcolm sat still in seat 1A, watching the soft light flicker across the cabin ceiling. The tension in his shoulders hadn't fully eased. His breathing had found a rhythm, yet something deep within remained alert, aware that the situation continued to evolve beyond his control. Across the aisle, Erin Shaw observed him from her position near the galley door. Her gaze carried a quiet understanding, not pity, but recognition and acknowledgement of the invisible battles carried by people who learned early to hold their head high even while the ground shifted beneath them. Passengers whispered in soft, careful tones. He handled that with so much grace. I can't believe how calm he stayed. This feels historic, doesn't it? Malcolm didn't react to their words, but he heard them. They floated through the air like fragments of something fragile and heartfelt. His mind drifted inward, replaying moments from his childhood when his mother would kneel down to his level and say gently, "Strength doesn't always look like force. Baby, sometimes it looks like choosing your moment." He pressed his fingertips together, grounding himself. A soft footstep approached. Aaron Clark eased into the seat across from him once more. The young reporter seemed both energized and sobered by what he had witnessed. "Dr. Reid," he said quietly, "I've been covering tech leaders for years. But what you did, it's different. It's the kind of moment that echoes." Malcolm gave a faint smile. Echoes aren't enough. Change needs footsteps behind it. Aaron nodded, thoughtful. Before he could respond, the curtain drew back sharply. Captain Miller returned, his face a mixture of determination and weariness. Behind him, the gate agent stepped quietly into the cabin. Lauren followed last, her expression brittle, her posture stiff as if bracing against an unseen wind. The conversations cut off instantly. The captain looked around the cabin before speaking. "Thank you all for your patience. We're going to resolve this now, transparently." He motioned for the gate agent to stand beside him. "This gentleman has something to clarify." The agent swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he held a tablet. "I just spoke with operations," he said, voice thin. "There was never any request to reassign seat 1A. That instruction did not come from them." Passengers murmured. Someone whispered. So it really was made up. The agent continued, breathing unevenly. "I also reviewed my earlier conversation with the crew. The suggestion to move the passenger came from inside the cabin, not from the system." His eyes flicked toward Malcolm, then away quickly, as if ashamed. Lauren shifted. Her fingers tightened around her tablet. The captain faced her gently. "Lauren, I need you to explain your decision." Several passengers leaned forward slightly, phones lowered but ready. Lauren took a breath. When Dr. Reid boarded, I felt uncertain. Something didn't match what I expected. Her voice trembled. The manifest seemed unusual at first glance. I thought maybe it was a glitch. I asked the gate agent to double-check. And instead of verifying, the captain said softly, "You assumed." Lauren's jaw tightened, her eyes moistening slightly. "I didn't mean harm." The cabin reacted with disbelief. A man in row 2 spoke, voice steady. "That's always the story. Harm wasn't intended, but it happened." A woman behind him added, "Intent doesn't erase impact." Lauren lowered her head. "I know." Malcolm remained still, watching quietly. The ache inside him deepened, not sharper, but fuller, like the memory of an old wound resurfacing. He had faced assumptions all his life, yet each new one still carried its own sting. The captain turned to the passengers. "We take discrimination seriously. This incident should never have occurred." A ripple of agreement moved through the cabin. He then turned back to Malcolm. "Dr. Reid, I want you to know this is being addressed at the highest level immediately. I've contacted our regional leadership. They are expecting to speak with you directly." Malcolm nodded. "I'll speak with them once we're on the ground. For now, the priority is safety and the passengers." The captain's expression warmed with respect. "That's appreciated more than you know." A woman in row 3 lifted her hand slightly. "Captain, do we need to deplane?" The captain took a moment before answering. "No, we can still continue the flight, but only if Dr. Reid is comfortable." The cabin turned to Malcolm like a single living being. The weight of their eyes pressed gently on him. He inhaled slowly. "I'm comfortable staying on board. I chose to speak up, not shut everything down." Relief washed over faces across the cabin. Some even sighed. But he wasn't finished. His voice softened, yet carried through the space with unmistakable clarity. "However, I believe accountability matters, not punishment. Accountability." Lauren's eyes lifted slightly, uncertain. Malcolm's tone remained calm. "I don't want anyone fired today. That decision belongs to the airline. But I want this addressed honestly and formally, and I want assurance it will not be buried." Captain Miller nodded firmly. "It won't be." Silence followed, long enough for the moment to settle into everyone's memory. Erin stepped forward from the galley, her presence like a soft anchor grounding the tension. "If it helps," she said gently, "I will personally accompany Dr. Reid's statement to operations, and I will ensure transparency in the report." Malcolm met her eyes and saw genuine sincerity. "Thank you," he said quietly. Lauren wiped at her eyes subtly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I judged too quickly. I let assumptions guide me. I'm truly sorry." The apology hung in the air, trembling with honesty and regret. Malcolm studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Thank you for saying that." Something in the cabin softened. Not absolution, not closure, but humanity. Captain Miller straightened. "If everyone is ready, we will prepare for departure." The cabin began settling again. Passengers returned to their seats, phones lowered, conversations softened. Malcolm leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. For the first time since boarding, he felt his breath truly deepen. Not because everything was perfect, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Not by him alone. Erin approached one last time before takeoff. "Dr. Reid, if there's anything you need during the flight, just let me know." He nodded. "I appreciate you." She gave him a genuine smile and stepped away. As the engines began to hum, a man across the aisle said softly, "You changed something today." Malcolm looked out the window, watching the runway lights stretching ahead. "I didn't change it alone," he replied. "People listened. That matters." The aircraft shifted gently as it prepared to taxi. A page had turned. The cabin knew it. Malcolm felt it. The next chapter waited just beyond the runway. The aircraft began its slow roll toward the runway, the faint vibration humming beneath Malcolm's shoes. First class had grown quiet, not from tension now, but from a reflective stillness that lingered after truth had been spoken aloud. Conversation softened, breath steadied, and the weight of what happened drifted over the cabin like a thin, almost sacred veil. Malcolm sat upright, hands resting loosely on his knees. The leather of seat 1A no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place reclaimed, a place earned twice over, first by purchase, then by the courage to demand recognition of what was his. As the plane crept along the taxiway, Aaron's phone buzzed. Once, then again, then nonstop. The reporter glanced at the screen and drew in a quiet breath. Oh, wow. Malcolm turned slightly. Something wrong. Aaron looked torn between excitement and disbelief. Dr. Reid, the story has already spread, a lot faster than I expected. How fast? Malcolm asked gently. Aaron exhaled, tilting the phone so Malcolm could see. The first video, just 20 seconds long, showed the moment Malcolm refused to sit in the economy seat. A caption flashed across the top. CEO denied first class. Oh, seat 1A empty. Airline refuses explanation. Below it, icons burst like scattered stars. 5 million views, then 6 million, then 8, in under half an hour. Another video showed passengers testifying on his behalf, voices calm, faces honest. A third clip captured Captain Miller speaking with firm conviction about fairness. A fourth clip focused on Lauren's uneasy expression before she apologized. And the fifth clip, the one rising fastest, showed Malcolm standing at the aisle, composed, resolute, saying only 6 words, "I don't believe in shrinking." It had crossed 10 million views. Malcolm watched the numbers rise as if they belonged to someone else. He felt no pride, no rush of adrenaline, only a subtle heaviness tugged at his chest, an awareness that he had become a symbol without intending to be one. Aaron whispered, "This is everywhere. Every major platform. Every news outlet is reposting it. Even the ones that stay away from corporate stories," Malcolm asked. "Even them." Aaron replied, "This has moved beyond corporate. This is human." A woman across the aisle leaned in hesitantly, not wanting to intrude. "Dr. Reid, my sister texted me just now. She saw you on television. It's all over the morning segments." Another voice added from a nearby row, "My son is in high school. He just messaged me. He said his whole class is talking about this." Malcolm listened, absorbing each word slowly. Aaron approached quietly, pausing beside his seat. "Dr. Reid," she said softly, "the control tower just notified us. There's media gathering at the San Francisco gate. More than usual." He raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" She nodded. "They're waiting for statements from the airline. And from you." Malcolm held her gaze for a moment. "I didn't want any of this." "I know," Aaron replied. "Sometimes stories choose us." A wave of emotion passed through Malcolm. Weariness mingled with clarity. He sank back into his seat, pressing his palm gently over his chest as if soothing a bruise inside. Aaron leaned forward, his voice softer now. "If you speak when we land, people will listen. They're listening already." Malcolm turned his head toward the window. Outside, The runway lights stretched across the pavement, glimmering like a path into something uncertain. "I'm not sure what to say yet," he confessed. "Say what you said here," Aaron murmured. "Say the truth." Before Malcolm could respond, a chime sounded overhead. Aaron and two attendants moved through the aisle as the aircraft slowed to a halt. The pilot's voice came through the speaker. "We've been asked to hold position briefly due to unexpected traffic on the runway." Passengers exchanged puzzled looks. Aaron lifted her tablet to check incoming messages. When she saw the display, her eyebrows rose. "There's a demonstration at the terminal," she whispered. Malcolm looked over. "A demonstration." She nodded. A crowd gathered after seeing clips online. They're holding signs. Some say fairness in the skies. Others say dignity for all flyers. And a few have your name. The cabin fell silent. A woman 2 rows back wiped at the corner of her eye. It's like the world remembered something it forgot for a long time. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, absorbing her words. The captain entered the cabin once more. He approached Malcolm with the steady presence of someone who understood leadership not as position, but as responsibility. "We've been instructed to pause before takeoff," Captain Miller said quietly, "partly due to runway traffic, and partly because our airline's leadership wants to issue an official statement before we depart." "They're releasing it now," Malcolm asked. "Yes, right now." Aaron showed him the tablet. A message streamed across the screen, the airline acknowledging the incident, acknowledging mishandling, acknowledging bias, promising immediate internal review, transparency, and reform. It was the kind of statement corporations rarely issued so quickly. Malcolm read it silently. His breath steadied. The captain waited for his reaction. "Do you feel this is a step in the right direction?" Malcolm lifted his gaze. "It's a beginning, not a solution, but a beginning." "I agree," the captain said. "And beginnings matter," Aaron whispered from his seat. "People are reacting positively already. They're sharing the statement alongside your video." A soft laugh came from a passenger nearby. "This man grounded the entire airline in less than an hour." Another voice said, "He grounded the internet too." A ripple of gentle laughter eased the heaviness in the cabin. Malcolm looked around slowly. He saw faces of every background, faces that had observed, then spoken up, faces that had shifted from quiet passengers to witnesses of truth. The plane still had not moved. The moment lingered, suspended like breath before a decision. Aaron leaned closer. "Dr. Reid, if you want to address the cabin before we take off, now might be a meaningful time." Malcolm hesitated. He didn't want to deliver a speech. He didn't want to lecture strangers. But he understood. The moment was larger than him. He rose slowly, turning to face the passengers. They quieted, watching him with a mix of respect and anticipation. Malcolm spoke gently, his voice steady. "I didn't expect today to unfold like this. I only wanted to reach my destination like all of you. But when something wrong happens in front of you, sometimes silence becomes heavier than speaking." Several passengers nodded, eyes softening. "I'm grateful," Malcolm continued, "for those who chose to speak up, not because of who I am, but because they recognized an unfair moment. Truth doesn't rise alone. It rises with witnesses." A woman whispered, "Amen." "I hope," Malcolm said, "that what happened today reminds us we belong in every seat we earn, no exceptions." A low, meaningful applause spread through the cabin. Not loud, not showy, but warm, human. Malcolm sat again, his breath finally easing into a calmer rhythm. Aaron whispered, "You just created the quote that will define the story." Malcolm didn't answer. He didn't need to. The engines rumbled softly. The aircraft resumed its slow movement. A new sense of unity settled through the rows. For the first time since boarding, Malcolm felt something unfamiliar in the air. Not tension, not defiance, hope. The aircraft finally lifted from the runway, rising into a sky washed in soft streaks of pale gold. The engine steadied into a low hum, carrying the cabin upward with a calm that contrasted sharply with everything that had transpired moments earlier. Though the plane now soared, the atmosphere inside remained grounded in reflection, almost reverent. Malcolm sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the clouds drifting past the window. He wasn't admiring the view. He was listening to the silence around him, a silence filled with the collective heartbeat of passengers who had witnessed something rare and deeply human. His hands rested gently against the armrest. Fingers relaxed, but his mind continued to turn. He thought of his mother's voice, warm and steady, guiding him through childhood's storms with simple truths. You don't have to win every fight, Malcolm, she had once said, but you must recognize the ones that shape you. This one had shaped more than him. It had carved something into the people around him, something that would ripple far beyond a single cabin. As he breathed in deeply, Earnshaw approached with a cup of water, setting it on the small table beside him with quiet care. "Everything all right?" she asked softly. Malcolm nodded. "Thank you. Aaron, I'm just absorbing all of this." She gave a sympathetic smile. "You carried the weight with grace. Not many could have done that." He appreciated her words. There was sincerity in them, subtle, grounded, not performative. "You handled yourself with integrity, too," he said. The truth needed a voice on the inside. A faint warmth softened Aaron's eyes. "I couldn't stay silent. Not after seeing the manifest myself." Malcolm nodded again, gratitude lingering in the air between them. Across the aisle, Aaron Clark whispered into his phone, the glow of the screen lighting his focused expression. He wasn't recording now. He was reporting not for virality, but for clarity. He caught Malcolm's glance and lowered the phone. "Dr. Reid," he said quietly, leaning closer. "CNN, NBC, and AP News want statements, but they're waiting. Nobody wants to rush your words." "That's kind of them," Malcolm replied gently, "but I won't speak until I feel steady. Not reactive." Aaron smiled. "Exactly why this is resonating so much." The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft leveled into a tranquil altitude. A sense of calm settled deeper into the rows. Some passengers had fallen asleep. Others simply sat in silence, contemplating the weight of what they'd seen. A man 2 seats ahead rose and approached Malcolm with careful steps. His hair was silvered, his posture proud yet softened by age. "Dr. Reid," he began, hands clasped respectfully. "I'm a retired federal judge. I've presided over cases involving discrimination. Today, what you did was more than assert your rights. You gave others permission to reflect on their own silence." Malcolm listened fully, giving the man his attention. "Thank you," he said. "Your words mean a great deal." The older man nodded once. "Keep carrying the truth with the calm you showed today. It opens more doors than anger ever could." He returned to his seat quietly, leaving a thoughtful weight behind. Malcolm turned slightly, allowing his head to rest against the seat back. His gaze drifted upward, following the pattern of tiny lights embedded along the cabin ceiling. He let himself settle into the moment, letting the tension in his chest loosen one breath at a time. Yet beneath the calm, a flicker of uncertainty stirred. What would happen once they landed? Not for him, he was accustomed to facing rooms that looked at him with scrutiny, but for the conversation now happening across the country, sparked by clips and captions and a story that had grown beyond anything he intended. He thought of Iron Shield's employees, of young engineers who looked like him, of families who had reached out to him over the years saying, "My son sees you and believes he can get there too." He didn't want this moment to become a spectacle. He wanted it to become a bridge. The overhead lights brightened slightly. The speakers chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Aaron announced, "we'll begin our descent into San Francisco shortly. Please remain seated as we prepare for landing." Passengers straightened in their seats, adjusting belts and bags, but the energy remained soft, reflective. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, letting the announcement settle. San Francisco waited below, along with reporters, cameras, and a crowd he had not asked for. Yet he understood the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. It wasn't something he chose, but something given. And perhaps that was the truer form of leadership, not stepping forward by desire, but by necessity. Aaron leaned across the aisle again. "If you want help shaping your statement later, I can draft something. Or not, I don't want to intrude." Malcolm smiled faintly. "I appreciate that, but I think the right words will find their way." "That they will," Aaron said softly. The plane dipped slightly, the hum of the engine shifting as the descent deepened. The cabin windows revealed patches of California coastline, sunlit water glimmering like polished steel. Passengers murmured softly at the view. Aaron passed through the aisle once more, checking belts, ensuring bags were secured. When she reached Malcolm, she paused. "You know," she said quietly, "the crew at San Francisco already heard about what happened. I can't promise how they'll respond, but I believe many will want to acknowledge what you stood for." Malcolm drew a slow breath. "I'm ready for whatever comes. As long as the truth stays intact, it will," she assured him. A gentle shudder ran through the cabin as the landing gear extended. The runway appeared beneath them, long and steady. The wheels touched down with a soft roar, the aircraft slowing as the energy shifted from flight to arrival. As the engines quieted, a new sound filled the cabin, dozens of phones dinging in unison as they reconnected to the world below. A woman gasped, "Oh my goodness, look at this," a man whispered. "The hashtag just passed 15 million. Another voice added, "People are gathering outside the terminal." Aaron checked his phone, eyes widening. "Dr. Reid, this is bigger than any of us thought." Malcolm inhaled slowly, letting the reality sink in, but refusing to let it overwhelm him. The pilot spoke over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. We ask that you remain seated until the aircraft has come to a full stop." The plane rolled to its gate, slowing gradually. And then the faintest sound filtered through the hull of the aircraft. Not voices, not shouting. A rhythmic noise, steady and unified. Clapping. Passengers exchanged stunned looks. "Is that?" For him, they're clapping outside. "Oh my!" The aircraft stopped fully. The cabin lights brightened. Aaron took a gentle step forward and whispered to Malcolm, "They're waiting for you." He nodded slowly, not with fear, not with pride, but with the calm resolve of someone who understood that his story was no longer just his. It belonged to every person who had ever been doubted, every person who had ever been overlooked, every person who had ever wondered if speaking up mattered. Today proved it did. The seatbelt sign went dark with a soft chime. Yet no one hurried to stand. No arms reached for the overhead bins. No scramble began. Instead, first class remained still, almost reverent, as if the passengers sensed they were suspended in a moment that would not return once broken. Malcolm sat quietly, palms resting against his thighs. He watched the reflection of the terminal glass glimmer on the window. Each glow felt like an invitation into something unknown, something larger than personal experience, something collective. Erin stepped closer and lowered her voice. "The ground team asked me to escort you out. They want to handle the crowd carefully." Malcolm nodded, feeling the air shift around him. "Is the crowd that large?" She hesitated, a subtle softness crossing her features. "Large enough that they've pulled extra security. Not because anyone is angry. They're supportive. They're just moved." A breath caught in Malcolm's chest. Moved. He had heard that word countless times in speeches, conferences, and interviews, but rarely had it been directed towards something that felt so deeply personal. He rose slowly from his seat. The passengers nearby straightened, watching with a quiet pride. A man in the aisle murmured, "We're behind you, Dr. Reid." A whispered chorus followed him as he stepped into the narrow walkway. As he reached the front of the cabin, Captain Miller stood waiting. He extended a hand, his face solemn yet kind. "It was an honor to have you on board, Dr. Reid." Malcolm accepted the handshake. "Thank you for the way you handled everything." The captain gave a modest nod. "I only did what the moment required. You did the harder part." Passengers behind them nodded, murmuring in agreement. The aircraft door opened with a gentle hiss, revealing a jet bridge lined with personnel from the airline supervisors, managers, and staff. Some carried tablets, others held radios. All wore expressions of cautious respect. Erin walked beside Malcolm, her presence steady and grounding. A senior employee approached first, his suit crisp, his name badge reading Richard Hale Regional Operations Director. His voice was formal but warm. "Dr. Reid, I want to apologize on behalf of Atlantic West Airlines. We deeply regret the experience you endured." Malcolm listened, absorbing the tone beneath the words. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. I appreciate your acknowledgement." Richard exhaled as if he had rehearsed the conversation, yet still felt unprepared for the weight of meeting Malcolm face to face. "We've reviewed the captain's report and the passenger statements. We're initiating a full internal investigation. This cannot be dismissed lightly." Erin glanced at Malcolm as if checking whether this aligned with what he needed to hear. Before Malcolm replied, another figure approached from behind the operations director, a woman with sharp eyes and a careful posture. She introduced herself with a quiet confidence. "I'm Carla Owens, Vice President of Customer Equity. The executive team asked me to meet you personally. They're preparing a formal response for public release." Her tone carried something different, responsibility mixed with genuine concern. "We want your voice included in the review process." Malcolm studied her for a moment before responding. "I can be part of the conversation, but I'm not here for retribution. I want lasting solutions, not temporary apologies." Carla nodded slowly. "I understand, and we're prepared to build exactly that." The sincerity in her voice felt real, unforced. Behind them, Aaron Clark finally stepped into the jet bridge. His camera remained off out of respect, though his eyes carried the awareness of history unfolding. Richard gestured gently toward the end of the bridge. "Dr. Reid, before we walk further, there's something we need you to know." Malcolm tilted his head. "What is it?" Carla's voice softened. "There are hundreds of people waiting beyond the gate. They saw the videos. They saw the statement. They came to show support." A quiet awe rippled through the attendants standing nearby. Malcolm looked toward the glowing rectangle at the end of the walkway. "I wasn't expecting this. No one expected this," Richard admitted. "It's unprecedented." Aaron stepped slightly closer. "You don't have to speak to them if you don't want to." Malcolm considered that. The easy path would be to bow his head and slip away quietly. But silence had never been his refuge. Not as a boy facing dismissive teachers, not as a young engineer overlooked for promotions, not as a CEO walking into boardrooms that doubted his presence. He inhaled slowly. "I'll speak." Aaron nodded, understanding more in that moment than words could convey. They began walking down the jet bridge. Each step felt heavier and lighter at once, heavy with responsibility, light with purpose. As they neared the gate door, sounds filtered through the metal. Chatter, murmurs, camera shutters, and underneath it all, applause. Rhythmic, growing, rising like a tide. When the door opened, the terminal erupted into a wave of sound, not chaotic, but unified. A mass of travelers, employees, and community members lined the corridor. Many held phones up, others held signs. Fairness for all flyers. Dignity has no class. Thank you, Dr. Reid. Your voice is our voice. And among them, a handwritten sign that nearly stopped Malcolm in his tracks. My son saw your video. Now he believes he belongs anywhere. His breath tightened, emotion surging deeper than he expected. Carla stepped aside, giving him room. Richard gestured subtly for calm. The crowd lowered their voices, waiting. Malcolm steadied himself. He approached the railing barrier that separated him from the gathering. Dozens of eyes found him, some hopeful, some tearful, some fierce with solidarity. He spoke gently, but his voice carried across the terminal as if amplified by the collective energy around him. "I didn't plan for today to become a moment," he said. "I only wanted truth." The crowd quieted fully. "I stand here because so many of you understood something deeper than a seat on a plane. You understood that dignity is not a luxury. It is a right." A woman near the front whispered, "Yes, today wasn't about anger." Malcolm continued, "It was about clarity. It was about refusing to shrink when faced with something wrong." Several heads nodded. Even airport employees paused mid-shift to listen. And if this moment leads to better policies, fairer skies, and more honest conversations, then every uncomfortable second of it was worth it. A soft wave of applause moved through the terminal, not explosive, but warm and enduring. Malcolm's gaze softened. "I hope this becomes more than a headline. I hope it becomes a reminder that all of us have the power to stand with truth, even when shaking, even when tired, even when alone." A deeper applause rose, surrounding him like a tide lifting a ship. He bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for standing with me." The crowd responded not with shouts, but with a shared, unified clap that echoed like a heartbeat. Aaron placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You handled that beautifully." Malcolm exhaled, feeling a rare mix of vulnerability and strength. "I only spoke what I had lived." And for the first time since boarding the flight, he felt something ease completely inside him, not just resolution, not just relief, but the first hint of healing. Applause still lingered behind him as Malcolm stepped away from the crowd, guided gently by Aaron and the airline's leadership, through a quieter corridor that bypassed the streaming cameras. The noise softened as distance grew, fading into a low hum that vibrated through his chest, like an echo he wasn't quite ready to let go of. Richard Hale walked a respectful step behind him. Carla Owens followed with her tablet hugged close, her expression a blend of determination and regret. Aaron Clark stayed near the back of the group, observing, absorbing, documenting, not with his camera, but with his eyes like a chronicler who understood that some stories deserved to be carried with care. When they reached a private lounge used for high-profile passengers, Aaron opened the door. "Just for a moment," she murmured. "You deserve a breath." Malcolm stepped inside. The lounge was quiet, lit gently by ceiling lamps that cast warm shadows against the walls. A few leather chairs, a glass table, a muted view of the runway beyond the window. Nothing extravagant, just calm. He leaned against the chair, hands resting gently on the backrest. His breath finally eased into something steady. Carla approached first, her voice soft. "We know you've had a long day, but before we proceed, I want to express, not a scripted apology, but a human one." He looked at her, listening. What happened on that plane should not have happened anywhere. You deserved respect from the moment you walked up to the gate, and you didn't receive it. Her voice trembled slightly at the last words. Malcolm nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty." Richard stepped beside her. "Our executive board has called an emergency meeting. This isn't going to be brushed aside or minimized. We'll be rolling out mandatory systemic training, updating boarding protocols, and creating a transparency channel directly accessible to customers," Carla added. "We also want to build a cross-industry task force focused on bias in customer experience, not just in airlines, across all major service sectors." Malcolm absorbed her words. Thoughtful. "That's a good step," he said. "But make it more than a headline." "It will be," she answered softly. Silence settled, not uncomfortable, but reflective. Aaron stepped forward, her eyes gentle. "Dr. Reid, there's something you should hear before you go." She tapped a message on her tablet and handed it to him carefully. The screen displayed an email from a young flight attendant in training. Her writing was shaky but sincere. "I saw the videos. I'm new. I joined this job to serve people, but today I realized I still carry fears of speaking up. What you did taught me something. It taught me to be braver the next time I see something wrong. Thank you for giving people like me a voice to follow." Malcolm's chest tightened, not with pain, but with a quiet ache of recognition. He handed the tablet back gently. "That means more than you think." Aaron smiled softly. "I knew it would." Aaron stepped closer now, stopping at a respectful distance. "If you're ready," he said, "I'd like to begin the interview, but only if you feel steady enough." Malcolm considered that. He felt tired not physically, but deeply. Yet he also felt clarity rising inside him, like a tide settling after a storm. "Yes," he said. "Let's talk." Aaron nodded and set up a small voice recorder. No camera, no bright light, just words between them. "Dr. Reid," he began softly, "the world is calling today a defining moment. How would you describe it?" Malcolm looked out the lounge window, watching a plane take off into the wide sky, its lights gliding through the haze. "I'd describe it as a reminder," he said gently. "A reminder that dignity is not something granted by others. It's something we carry. And sometimes we have to stand up not to claim authority, but to reclaim what should never have been questioned." Aaron absorbed his words, his expression sober. "What do you hope people remember from today that speaking up matters?" Malcolm replied. "Not for applause, not for recognition, but because silence can quietly shape the world into something unkind if left unchallenged." Aaron paused before his next question. "And how do you feel?" "Personally," Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, choosing his words with care. "I feel the weight," he said, "but not in a way that breaks me. in a way that reminds me why my parents taught me to walk with my back straight, in a way that reminds me that progress happens in moments like these, quiet moments that grow louder than anyone expects. Aaron lowered the recorder. That's everything I needed. Carla approached again. Your car's ready whenever you are. Malcolm turned to Aaron. Thank you, he said quietly, for standing where it mattered. She shook her head gently. I only followed your lead. He smiled, small but warm. That's how change starts, with one voice, then another. They stepped out of the lounge and into the quieter side corridor that led to the airport's VIP exit. A black SUV waited outside, its headlights casting an easy glow across the pavement. As Malcolm approached the vehicle, someone called out from the side. He turned. A mother stood with her teenage son, a boy no older than 15. His hands were tucked nervously into his hoodie pockets, his eyes wide, unsure. The mother spoke softly. I'm sorry to stop you. We didn't want to crowd you, but my son, he wanted to tell you something. The boy stepped forward. His voice cracked slightly. When I saw what happened to you, I saw myself. I just wanted to say, thank you. Malcolm's eyes softened. He crouched slightly to meet the boy's gaze. You belong everywhere your work earns you, he said gently. Don't let anyone make you forget that. The boy nodded, eyes glistening. Malcolm stood again, offering the mother a nod before turning toward the SUV. As he settled into the back seat, the door closing with a soft click, he allowed a breath to fill his chest fully for the first time in hours, not with relief alone, not with victory, but with something deeper, a sense of purpose that felt authentically his. As the vehicle began to pull away from the airport, he rested his hand against the window. The city lights stretched outward, forming a path that shimmered with possibility. He thought of Iron Shield's team waiting for him tomorrow. He thought of the young engineer he had once been. He thought of every quiet moment in his life when he had chosen dignity over silence. And he whispered to himself, almost like an affirmation carried on an exhale, forward. Because the story didn't end today. Today was simply the moment the world began listening. The story of Malcolm Reid reminds us of something so simple, yet so difficult. Human dignity is not always given. Sometimes it must be protected. In life, everyone will at some point face unfair situations, be undervalued, or be treated in a way that is not consistent with the efforts they have made over the years. Young people often choose anger. Old people sometimes choose silence. But Malcolm chose a third way: calm, clear, but firm. He didn't make a fuss, didn't put anyone down, but he also didn't accept being taken lightly. And it was that attitude that made everyone around him look at themselves, from passengers, crew, to even airline executives. The biggest message the story conveys is when you stand up for what is right, you not only change your own life, you also pave the way for others to overcome their fears. We can't all be CEOs, but we all have moments when we have to choose between being quiet and speaking up. Just being kind and keeping your back straight is enough to make a difference in the world. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you believe that good things deserve to be shared, please like, share, and subscribe. The little things you do today can touch someone who needs hope. Ready for more heartwarming stories? Stay with us.